Hello, everybody. My name is Erin Brodwin. I'm a reporter with Business Insider, and I'm going to be moderating this panel today. How's everybody feeling?
Excellent.
Pretty good? Pretty good? Cool. So let's start off by having each of you introduce yourselves, starting Tim.
Hi, my name's Tim. I'm the founder of a cultivated meat company called Vow. We're in Australia, so we're the only cultivated meat product company in Australia. We're pretty new, so we incorporated the company in March, and so far we have 4 different animals under culture. But we're most known at the moment for our kangaroo dumpling that we did this year.
My name is Cody Creelman. Alex is going to be mortified when he looks over at the screen and sees that I am with Blue because I am not. So are you okay, Alex? Can you make it through that? So it should just say veterinarian under there. So I'm a beef cattle veterinarian from Alberta, Canada. I grew up on a farm. I grew up on a ranch. We had 300 head of Simmental Charolais cows. My dad was a banker turned cattle buyer. I entered into veterinary school and became a beef cattle consultant. So I've been a beef cattle consultant since the inception of my veterinary degree. And my clientele had ranged anywhere between 30 cows all the way up to 30,000 cows. So my primary goal was always to improve animal health and welfare.
Excellent. All right, my name is Guy Krims, born here in San Francisco, conceived in 1969 on Quaaludes, red wine, and marijuana. My mom is a hippie, my dad is a biker, so I'm still a little bit of both, a lot of bit of both. I read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle in 1984 when I was 14. If anybody's read that, please raise their hand, please. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, if you did not read it, you should. It described the horrors of the meat industry, the turn of the previous century, outed the horrors of the stockyards in Chicago, not only about the mistreatment of the animals, but also the mistreatment of humans in this profession. I gained a reverence for Mother Earth from my mom and the food that we put in my mouth, our mouths. Went to a little Italian butcher shop in Pacifica, where I still live to this day. I'm German-Irish, little Italian man, took me under his wing, taught me everything I know. Went off to do some wonderful work at a place called Pape Meat Company down in Millbrae that still exists, wonderful butcher shop. It's been in constant operation since 1958. Did some extensive traveling through Japan, fell in love. It's a very long story with Japanese Wagyu. I'm the largest retailer of Japanese A5 Wagyu in the Western Hemisphere. Just returned from Japan about 10, 11 weeks ago, about $1.2 million of Japanese A5 Wagyu, 5.5 metric tons. I have an affinity for the beauty in life and how the Japanese treat and respect what is ingested and the love and the care that's put in that. I've found farmers here in the United States, in the Midwest, that have emulated that Japanese mentality, and that's what I carry in my shop. So it's with respect, care, and love where I come from in my industry. So it's an honor to be here today and see the future of what's happening in the protein industry and to actually hope to be part of that. Hopefully I'm old enough to sell cultured meat in my store. So with that said, thank you guys for having me here today. And thank you, Alex.
Thanks. So it's Friday. By now, all of you, I assume, have had an overview of this industry from the basic science of how a plant-based product like the Impossible Burger gets made, right up until the science that goes into making cultivated meat a reality. So since our panel is dedicated to lab-grown or cultivated or cultured meat, I'd like to start off by posing a question to the traditional meat expert up here with me. Guy, you're a vet of the butcher business, and you're a legend in the world of Japanese Wagyu. Before you start swapping out some of your Wagyu beef for cultivated beef, what are you looking for Are there specific characteristics or capabilities in the meat that you'd like it to have? Types of cuts that you're looking for, specific textures, flavor profiles, those sorts of things. What about, cooking options? Are there certain things that you'd want to see cultivated meat have before you start deciding to serve it to customers that are used to the types of meat that you are used to serving?
Absolutely. Well, that's a really good question. It's akin to what we have now with, I would say, electric cars, right? First, we had these clunky little cars. I'm not going to name some of them, but some of them I don't like. I ride motorcycles every day, and I get cut off by them all the time, but that's a whole nother story. But anyway, with that said,
I hope you're not talking about Priuses.
Not yet. Not yet. I didn't say it. Did I say it? So I try to, what a police officer once said to me? He said, by not saying what's going on, you're actually telling me what's going on, right? So there you go. So anyways, no hate on Priuses. I actually appreciate it. So, but with that said, in the beginning, you're not going to be able to actually tell the producers what we get to sell or what we get to buy. I would like to be the first person to actually have that first piece for sale. For example, who knows what that texture is going to be? I just had a fascinating conversation outside with a gentleman and a young lady that have a machine, which I've never seen before, that actually presses for texture and push test on how the knife goes into the product and how that's going to mouth at some point. This data, I'm totally fascinated. So let's say we have a nice, small, thin cut, and that's how we slice the Wagyu, for example. And that cut will be this dainty, tasty little cut that you would do on your cast iron with a little Himalayan sea salt, what have you. As these products over the next year, 3 years, 10 years, then you start to get to specific cuts where you can take cells from, let's say, the skirt steak, the flank steak, the hanger steak, the prime rib, the short loin, the filet, the sirloin, anything. These all have totally different chew characteristics. So those kinds of things I'm totally intrigued about. Could you imagine like a roast of cultured meat? I imagine it costs probably $180,000. I have no idea how much this stuff's going to cost with all the funding that's gone into it. But at some point, that's kind of where I'm sitting at with it. That Moore's Law characteristic about it is we're going to have this piece, and then 5 years down the line with all the technology that's being produced right now is going to allow us to have this. So it's kind of where I'm at.
So you'd essentially want to see different types of beef that would be able to mimic like each section of the beef that we currently eat. So each section of the body of the animal, for example, that we get these different cuts from.
Because each one of those, we're first going to get, I don't know enough about the technology, but at first we're going to get the flavor profile of those different pieces, right? If we culture those cells. But also the physiology of the way the animal works. For example, the hanger steak that's inside this portion and holds all of the, basically your body sack around, is very close to the liver. So it's got a very livery flavor. Now, if that translates, which I highly doubt, over to culture, right? It's not going to, because that muscle is very close to the liver, so there's a lot of iron-rich blood pumping through there. So it's more physiological flavor than it's going to be flavor that you would get if you cultured that cell, for example. So that's kind of a fascinating part of it. And if you wanted to get that flavor, then you'd have to put a couple liver cells in there, for example, right, to get that irony taste. I don't know. There's a lot of, I don't like to call it playing around, because it's really not playing around. It's serious business, and I think that's kind of really intriguing to me. So, yeah.
That's really fascinating. Tim, what's your take on that? Your company is Vow. You're aiming to produce cultivated meat. Are you working on anything remotely like that, trying to get certain parts of meat to behave like the parts of meat that we have in actual animals, those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think we'll definitely get there. I think it's going to be some time, but I think we'll get there. I think muscle is a really, really complex thing. It's really hard to know exactly where to start with muscle. As a human, it takes us 12 months to actually be able to have muscles strong enough to support us as babies. So it's this really, really complex structure, and just understanding that by itself is enough of a challenge for our industry right now, for sure. In terms of being able to start to produce things that have those different flavors and liver cells, it actually is a little bit of playing around, and there's certainly going to be an aspect of playing around in there as well. it comes down to how can we start to mimic some of the things that happen in vivo, in vitro. So you talked about, the fact that that's supporting and the amount of hypertrophy or the level of hypertrophy that comes in that supporting, where it sits in terms of the ingredients that's fed into the nutrients and how that happens. We can start to think about replicating these things, but it's certainly not a first order problem that we're going to be attacking. I think there's a lot more challenges to tackle to start off with.
Great, thanks. So my next question is for everybody. So, this space is developing pretty rapidly. It's been taking place over several years so far, and assuredly more years to come. What kinds of technical challenges and successes as well have you encountered so far in your industry? So maybe Tim, you could start us off, because you aim to make cultivated meat, and I'd be curious to hear what maybe the hardest thing you've encountered so far, the biggest challenge, perhaps.
Yeah, I really don't know where to begin. There's so many challenges involved. Honestly, one of the toughest things is starting. I think that anyone out here that's thought about either biotech or cultivated meat knows how hard it can be sometimes to start, like finding lab space. And, we learned really quickly how heavy biosafety cabinets were. That was a hard lesson. So I think just getting started, getting to a point where you can start producing things was incredibly difficult. Though I think the hardest thing, I like to think that the hustle and the hacking that you can do to get that happening is something that anyone can do, and I invite people to think about entering the industry knowing that. I think the hardest thing is knowing exactly where to start with your science pipeline. Like, there are so many different variables that exist in muscle. It could be understanding, for instance, a lot of people focus on the proliferation at the start. How do we make sure that we're getting enough cells to start off with so that we have enough of a yield or enough of a biomass? But understanding the interrelationship between the different steps is a really, really tricky thing, because the things that help you proliferate muscle to start off with could be exactly the same things that make it a struggle to get mature muscle fibers out the other end. And so I think the hardest thing for us was consulting with experts, getting the right talent on board, and then knowing, where do we even start here? How do we make sure that the things that we're doing are exactly the right things in terms of priorities so that we can get to a commercial product as fast as possible?
I imagine there's a lot of overlaps with the medical industry. How did you find those experts that you said you were working with, and where did you even begin?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a bit of a catch-22 here. So I see there's an unreal opportunity in tapping into this expertise, and then at the same time, you've got to remember that the level of mindset that goes into medical technology is not the same for a consumer food product. So we need to move faster, things need to be cheaper. We started out in Australia. We have some really fantastic muscle physiology expertise. So in human therapeutics, down in Melbourne, we have one of the best kind of universities in the world for this. It's actually where we ended up poaching our chief scientific officer, for lack of a better word. So that's where we started. We started with the experts in Australia. I also started talking to people in the industry. I got connected with Alex really, really early on, and started just finding out, well, what are the problems that exist now? How are people solving them, and how do we get started? To be honest with you, we didn't do anything super special when we started. There is a lot of existing protocols out there for how to do the basic science of cell culture. For anyone that was here yesterday, you would have seen Yuki using, he talked about using Gatorade as growth media, right? So it's actually the fundamental steps in there themselves are not complicated. And so we started off with that, and we really, really quickly produced 2 proof of concept products, one pork and one kangaroo, to prove that you don't need hundreds of thousands of dollars even, not even millions, not even hundreds of thousands of dollars to create a proof of concept in this. And you can hack together a lab without having to go through all of the existing kind of, steps or gates that exist that you can get together really, really quickly.
Yeah, kangaroo is an interesting thing to start out with. How did you arrive at kangaroo?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. It's the first time anyone's taken an undomesticated animal and produced cultivated meat with it. Now, I don't expect that we'll be coming back in here in 2025 and I'll be serving all of you a kangaroo product. That's not the intention. But it is a talk to how we're looking at cultivated meat, which is this idea that we don't have to focus on the same sources for food that we've had before. We were constrained by our production processes when it came to meat, right? We've been able to get really, really good at producing the different animal types that you guys have seen, but those are based on the domestication criteria that we had before. And we believe that we're domesticating that by using cellular agriculture. So we believe that now we can start to tap into cell lines from lots and lots of different animals, either traditional or non-traditional like kangaroo, or even more crazy like Galapagos tortoise or other things, and start to understand the nutrition and flavor profiles. And so kangaroo for us was to prove that you can take an undomesticated species and culture it. You can use very, very similar techniques to what are being used on traditional species. So we started with porcine and then went to kangaroo. But also it's an incredibly lean protein. It's incredibly high in iron. It was the staple of the diet of the oldest living civilization in the world, which is the indigenous Australian people. It's to prove that we can start getting creative here. And it got people's attention. So most people don't know Val. They know the kangaroo dumpling. We're working through that. Soon people will know Val. But it was, it was to get that understanding and get people thinking about that.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for that. Cody, you're a vet, and you said in your bio that you're exploring the synergies between conventional food production and emerging technology. What is the biggest thing separating those things right now?
Yeah, so a very good question, and maybe I'll back up and just provide a little bit of background as why a cowboy with cow poop on his boots ends up in the Bay Area talking to a group of scientists and people interested in cultured meat, right? So it had all started really with me watching what was happening in the conventional agriculture space. I was just interested to see where the investment dollars in that area was going. I saw a massive divestment out of the traditional feedlot industry, and I saw that some of those dollars was going into alternative proteins. And that was a lot of different things. That could be insects, that could be aquaculture, and some of that was the dollars that was going into this industry. I'm from a traditional background, but I have a firm belief that that technology disrupts every industry. Just like agriculture disrupted hunting and gathering 12,000 years ago, something will disrupt conventional agriculture at some point. To speak a little bit as to what had happened in terms of the industry that Guy did not like, a lot of that was due to necessity, right? During the war era, we had this mass exodus of people out of the agrarian lifestyle to go fight in a war or move to the city. And there was still those mouths that needed to be fed, and there was no real choice. Like, it was out of true necessity. You had some innovations that had happened. You had the creation of antimicrobials from the war. Like, that was the driver for that, right? You had the creation of nitrogen fertilizer. That was an invention of the war. You had pesticides and herbicides. Those were all created during that. And at the same time, we were also getting really good at industrialization. So we shoehorned traditional agriculture into a system. And I love animals. I'm a veterinarian. I've dedicated my whole life to it. But when you have to choose between feeding people and raising animals in an ideal way, you're going to choose feeding people if you have to, right? This is what happened. So that was kind of like the setup. So as much as I believe that conventional agriculture is fulfilling a role, I by no means think it's perfect. But I also think that we have to be realistic in terms of there potentially will be a technological disruption. So that was kind of the start of everything for me in looking at this industry. And I started poking around, and I came across some of Isha Datar's YouTube videos. I found out she was a homegirl. She's from Canada. So I contacted her, and we started a really great discussion. Got to go to New Harvest 2 years ago and speak there. And that was just like, that was my role within the industry. My take home, to answer the question, my take home of what I figured out when I finally connected with this industry was we were all trying to do the same thing. It's all agriculture at the end of the day. We're just approaching it from different areas, but there's so much synergy that exists that both sides don't even know, right? There's so many things that animal agriculture, conventional animal agriculture, has figured out from a meat science, from a genomic standpoint, from a selection for phenotype standpoint, that could be applied to cell-based agriculture right now, and there's amazing things that is happening on the cell-based side where they're solving problems that conventional agriculture has that they don't even know they know how to solve. I remember when I was walking around New Harvest, I came across this guy. He's an adjacent relationship to cell-based agriculture, but still within the space. I asked him, what do you do? And he told me he works at a research facility and he works on genomics. And he had a pocket-sized genome sequencer. I'm like, you have a what? He's like, yeah, it's like the size of this cell phone. I'm like, how much does it cost to sequence a genome? He's like, the cost to flush a toilet. I'm like, so you're telling me you have a genome sequencer in your pocket that can essentially for $0 genotype. So I'm saying I could have this at a feedlot and I could be doing genotypes on cows as they're coming through and be able to select which ones are respiratory disease resistant and which ones aren't and manage those separately. And more than that, I could even do a genome sequencing of that cow's snot to see what type of viruses and bacteria are there and what type of antimicrobial resistance exists. He's like, yeah, that's what I do, bro. Like, he didn't even know all of the amazing things that I could do in terms of the conventional animal agriculture that he just thought was commonplace.
I'm assuming that's a very basic type of genome sequencing.
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
Genome sequencing still costs several $100.
Well, yeah,
$100.
but if you know, like with antimicrobial resistance, for example, we know the common bacteria that cause bovine respiratory disease. We know that there's only 12 antimicrobials that are used. So that is basic genome sequencing. It's not whole cow sequencing,
Okay.
right?
Gotcha.
But we know what gene exists for what makes a cow bovine respiratory disease susceptible or resistant, just their natural. So there is the ability to do that. So it was, that was what I guess figured out, is that there isn't two sides to this. It is the same thing. One thing that frustrates me as from an animal science background, from a veterinary medicine background, is the amount of technology I feel like that is lacking within the industry to do all the things that we want to do, to make the industry more sustainable, to reduce antimicrobial usage, to improve animal health and welfare. That's the goal of my job. That's the goal of the industry, to improve a little bit every single day. So we're both doing the same thing, but we're certainly not doing it together. So that's kind of where I landed.
Great, thanks. Guy, what about for you? What's the biggest challenge facing the traditional meat industry, perhaps specific to Wagyu or outside that?
Wow. You guys are all going to think, well, if you know me, this guy knows me. I'm absolutely insane. So this is a guy certified. This is a good question, really good question. I've been in the meat industry, as you guys know, almost my whole natural-born life. Beef production, protein production on planet Earth is the absolute worst thing you can do to our planet. Period. That's it. It's my opinion. As we all know, 1,000, this is basically a pound right here, your fist, 1,799 gallons of water to produce that much protein. My curiosity coming later, what's the water footprint of cultured meat? I don't know. I don't know that answer. My biggest concern, what's that?
That's a great question.
I don't know what it is. But I do know that we're using pesticides. I know that we're using Monsanto. I know we're buying aquifers up. It would be Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola, Dasani. We're buying up aquifers that go back 12,000 years to the previous ice age, and we're sucking that water out to basically feed these animals, right? I think it's absolutely insane. So I'm looking for alternatives for my children so that they have food, which is, I love that whole thing that you said about World War II and everything coming out of that. But we need to figure out that next step to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which we know are post-production of factory farming. We need to figure out how to reduce all these different factors, and trucking beef, that creates greenhouse gases. We're using diesel. It's just the vastness of taking all this product and getting it distributed to the masses in plastic, in cryovac bags, in styrofoam, in cardboard boxes. It's just on and on and on and on. So the impact is great. So this is a guy that makes his livelihood off of beef. So it might sound insane, but that's kind of where I'm at on that. And we need to fix it. We need to figure it out. We have a lot of issues on planet Earth, but we need to feed everybody. How the hell do we do that, right? We need to figure it out. So that's kind of my take on that.
Got it. So would you venture to say the biggest challenge facing traditional meat industry is climate change, or would you say it's broader than that or more specific than that?
I think it's a factor of everything. I think every time we touch something with technology, whether we're making that, piece to transport something, the tires that go onto the truck to transport the beef, everything. Every time you touch one thing that has to get it to the next spot, to the next spot, to the next spot, that goes with anything we do. That's even with our cell phones, right? We just keep making more and more and more and more. So I think if we looked at each industry and tried to reduce our consumption of natural resources to get an end piece, which I think that all these smart people in this room have the ability to do, that's the biggest problem of anything we consume, is we need to reduce it. That's that kind of Zen mentality I have. And I want to bring it down to its base. In my mind, bring it down to its base point. What are the 3 things we actually need to produce that one thing to get it distributed to the masses? I don't know, but there is a solution, so.
Okay, thanks. So Cody, you were talking a bit about sort of the separation. You have these experts working in one group and experts working in another, but they're not really communicating much. So my next question is, again, for all of you, but it's about that specifically. What areas do you think can be accelerated or moved forward by partnerships, and what types of partnerships do you want to see?
I think all of the areas could be accelerated, mainly just because that's where the money is, right? It's a $1 trillion industry in terms of the global meat industry, right? So, and they want, they have done, and they want to do the same thing that you want too, right? We produce way more beef, way more chicken, and way more pork with way less resources and way less animals than we did 40 years ago, right? So efficiencies have improved. But I also agree with you in terms of there is waste in the system. There is, driving down here from Canada, my mind is just blown in terms of, I saw a semi-truck hauling cardboard one direction and hauling cardboard the other direction. Like, it just doesn't make any sense, like a lot of what we do, right? So there is a system. I believe the vast majority of the agriculture industry wants to make changes, right? Certainly there's traditionalists, there's going to be that in every industry, right? But I think there is very progressive ranchers out there that you've partnered with. You know these guys, their exact mentality. There's ranchers here in this group right now that have that exact mentality, that are rethinking the way that we're doing things and want to create a product that just feels right to them, right? And there's negatives, but there's also the positives in terms of what we've been able to do. But so there's that incremental improvement. What can be changed is just in terms of all of those little small pieces. I think about, I like thinking about culture media, right? That's one of my favorite things to just think about in terms of substrate, because you still can't create. We don't have a replicator technology to just create base sugars out of the air yet. So there's still going to be some of those substrates that still come from agriculture, right? That we're still going to have to partner with agriculture and I guess streamline some of that communication to say, like, this is what our challenges are, and what are some things that you guys can do to solve that. I think the next generation of farmers and ranchers, they're going to be under pressures in terms of decreased margins. Like, there's limited margins in a lot of the industry. The progressive ones are going to be looking at how do they improve their business, and they're going to be looking towards technology to be able to do that. Well, I see in terms of conventional agriculture, we're on the precipice of that. So opening those lines of communication are important. The negative thing that I'm seeing is a lot of pushback from the conventional industry lobbyists. It's not necessarily the farmers and ranchers that I think are the ones kind of spitting back at the industry. Certainly there was some things like some inflammatory words that originally came out on both sides, right? So the word clean meat to a rancher was considered inflammatory to some extent, and then the ranchers threw back fake meat, right? So there's been a bit of a spitting match going back and forth, and the lobbyists in terms of the traditional beef cattle industry have been inflaming that, because that's what lobbyists do, right? They find a hot button topic and then they say that they're trying to address it. We see that around the nomenclature, right? So that has been a big thing of what is it going to be called? What is the definition of meat? That's what the lobbyists have been doing. So in the traditional mainstream media within agriculture, it's been very protectionist. There's this protectionist mentality. So there has to be some sort of way to help bridge that gap and to break that down, because you can't have this industry being blocked from a regulatory standpoint by the lobby groups, because then you'll just spin your tires and won't go anywhere. So there needs to just still be this open communication. We need to have half this room that is part of conventional agriculture. We need farmers and ranchers to be part of this discussion. So Alex is doing a great job bridging that gap by having people, inviting people part of the crowd and panelists, and I hope to see more of that, where it's not a cellular agriculture conference, it's an agriculture conference, it's an agriculture discussion, because at the end of the day, it's all agriculture.
Tim, well, Melanie posed the question to you. Who are your biggest allies in the business? What kinds of, you were talking about partnerships a little bit earlier, some scientists that you're working with, particularly in the medical industry. Who are your other allies?
It's a good question. So cultivated, clean, cultured meat, whatever you want to call it, it's, a lot of the time I don't think we appreciate just how many challenges there are here and just how many steps there are along the process too. This is the moon landing of food. This is really, really hard, and we need to pull together people from different groups, and no one's going to be able to do it individually. There's a lot of people in this room from a lot of different cultivated meat company. These guys are my heroes, but we all need to band together to talk to other people and start to create partnerships that are meaningful. We've partnered with some of the kind of top orthopedic surgery experts in Australia. The reason that we've done that is because it's really hard to get access to really good samples from a lot of different animals, which is part of our business model. They do a lot of research around different parts of different animals, and so we tack onto that research at the time too. They do toxicology reports that are in depth, or more in depth than we could ever do in-house, or that we want to do in-house at this time anyway, which means that when we're getting and generating our cell lines, we have incredible data as to the health of that animal, how they were when they started the culture, and so that we can reliably turn around at any given point and go, this piece of food that we've got here, we don't know just what field it was eating in, we know exactly how healthy it was at the time that we generated its cells and moved from there. The other thing, we started looking at genome sequencing as a really interesting opportunity to partner with academic institutions as well. The funny thing about science is, shit only happens when there's a good reason, right? And that good reason for a lot of the time is money opportunities, a lot of the time it is accolades. What we're finding is that we're, in this industry, able to start creating opportunities because it's in the best interests of cultivated meat, and at the same time we can start to do good science that is non-linear to our cause. So we're looking at how can we start to sequence the genome of animals we've never thought to sequence the genome of. We've definitely done a lot of sequencing of cattle and pork, right, because it makes sense for the industries that exist today, but there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of animals whose genomes we have never even thought to touch, because why would we? We don't care. It doesn't contribute towards anything. But there's so many rich opportunities in the data that exist in the genome of animals we've never thought about. What are the similarities in terms of the gene expression that exists in the genomes of all of these different animals, right? What if we could find similarities that contribute not only towards the way that we're thinking about meat and how muscle proliferates and generates, but also to wastage diseases and things that we can use in the veterinarian practice as well. So we're going to start partnering with institutes in Australia who have interests around sequencing genomes of animals for scientific benefit. So at the same time, we can also start to understand how those gene expressions contribute towards cultivated meat. So suddenly there's a reason. There's a good reason to be starting to do things that didn't seem like we should do them before. Other partnerships are things like, there are so many different steps along trying to land on the moon, and there's so many different steps along trying to create meat from cells. I mean, bioreactor design is something that we haven't necessarily nailed in-house. I'm yet to see anyone that's totally nailed it. Yuki, you're doing a pretty good job wherever you are. That looks awesome. Anyone that saw that technical stuff earlier on. But the reason being, and I think maybe we'll probably jump into this, but because I don't want to go on a tangent about it now, but there's a lot of steps in bioreactor design that I think we can start to see other parts of the industry stepping up to take part in. We have a lot of great experience at places like Sartorius and the medical industry that just need to learn that now that we're doing things in high throughput, the prices aren't going to stick anymore. And so we start to see things, there's this guy Francisco who created his own bioreactor while he was studying his master's in Portugal because they weren't going to give him the funding to pay for one. So he went, fuck it, I'm just going to build my own. And we're starting to see that across the whole industry. There's companies like Opentrons, if anyone's familiar with Opentrons. Pipetting is a really manual exercise that scientists do. Some people like it. You put on a podcast, it's fun. It's just not scalable to be doing this and picking up liquid and putting it somewhere else, right? So we've invented robots to do that. But it costs hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. So Opentrons have gone, screw it, it doesn't actually need to be that way. We can create modular small versions of that. So that's happening there, but that's just one step in the automation process. So the opportunities for partnerships in industry and robotics, in terms of working with veterinarians to be able to take samples and the know-how of how they're working, are endless. I could probably rant about this for ages.
Great, sounds good. Guy, how about you? Who are your biggest allies in the space? As a traditional meat producer, are there startups that you really want to partner with? Is there
in terms of the technology, or kind of my base, and where I would say is with farmers?
Yeah.
It always starts with the farmers, always. So that's part of my attitude is how it's being done first. So I propagate the ability first and the care first, and make sure that respect level is there. And I would see that these cultured cells would definitely be taken from these farmers who have done this. I wouldn't do it from any type of factory farming. There's plenty of people in the United States that are doing the right thing, from California to New York. It's happening. There's people who understand the process. That's what I would focus on. And after that, with the technology portion, I mean, it's kind of going out to you guys and how that all looks. Some of the questions that I ask, and it's not the forum for it, but it's why are we doing this, right? Is it because we can? Is it because we can go to the moon? Or is this the next thing for us? Is this the best way? Are all these resources that we're putting towards in monies and time and effort to create something new that's actually going to sustain us, because we have opposable thumbs, teeth, and this higher brain function? We're sentient beings, right? We need protein. That's why we're here, period. It doesn't matter if you get plant-based protein or animal-based protein. That's what causes this thing to work, and for good or bad. So the partnership would be, I'm going to be the end user at some point, and somebody is going to have to understand how to package that, what the shelf life looks like, because it's all about the eye, right? I've got right now on my counter down here on Division Street, I've got $20,000 worth of Japanese A5 Wagyu, just in one case. Now that's just on display. Now what happens if my refrigeration goes down, or what happens if I don't sell that product? I keep it at 30, it's selling, don't worry about it, but at 37 degrees, right? What's my shelf life, right? What's it gonna look like? I mean, when that meat turns brown, the cultured meat, now what do I do with it, right? It's got to look a certain way. And that's going to be the end piece. We just can't put breading in there and do all kinds of funky stuff to make it look like something different. We actually have to make it be itself, the pure thing that it is. It shouldn't be made to mimic the shape. I don't want to see cultured meats. I want to see like this thing, like a piece of tofu. I love tofu. Why wouldn't you put it in a tofu block somehow, some way, and then take slices off of it? I don't know. I do the Wagyu like they do in Japan. I cut it. Alex has seen it. I slice it into these perfect cubes, blocks. I render every ounce of fat off. Some of these animals are costing me $100, $200, $300, $400 a pound. I do not lose a drop of these animals, not a drop. And those are in these perfect little slices. So with that said, with something so special, and it's definitely rarefied air at the beginning when you guys are putting this on the market, you have to treat it with that care and that respect, because it is like landing on the moon. I mean, think about that. It happened 50 years ago, right? It's a long time ago, right? And I don't know. That's kind of what it's the end results I want to see and how that begins. But I don't want to see phony baloney stuff. I want it to represent it itself. I want it to be it. And that's, no matter what it is, it should be that. That same block of kangaroo protein should look the same as that Wagyu protein or that poultry protein. I don't want to have the old, here's your chicken breast, right? Looks like one, doesn't taste like one, right? It should be just that. That's my opinion.
Yeah, so let me ask you this, because you've obviously thought about this a lot. Would you envision yourself selling alongside traditional meat, cultivated meat? Would you envision selling it in equal proportions? Would you envision having it as just sort of an additional option on the menu? Would you go so far as to say you'd envision eventually only selling cultivated meat?
That's a wonderful question. So also associated with our butcher shop and our restaurant concept, we have a steakhouse also. So we of course feature these meats. So we would do this also in my head right now. If it was in front of me, it'd be at the steakhouse tonight. Now, no offense to anybody, but the millennials love to spend their money. They love it, and they want the experience the first time. And my biggest thing to Alex was, in a podcast we did, is I said, I want to be the first guy to sell that first kid. And I'm not gonna say where, they all work around me, but there's, they're making gobs of money, and I love it. Not because of profit, but it's just fun to see them spend it. But I would like to, because they just do stupid shit. I love it. But anyways, it's so cool. It's so cool. And I laugh. I get a kick out of it. But anyway, I would love to see them come in and get a 2-ounce slice for $500, And then 3 years later, I'd like to see them get a 2-ounce slice for $100. And 3 years after that, I would like to see them get a quarter-pound piece for $10.99 a pound. So I would like to see the progression of we know it's this expensive. It's like the first television, right? And now they're a dime a dozen, for good or bad, mind you, but that's another story. But anyway, yeah, I would see it next to conventional meat. At some point, I think 50 years down the road, sure, there'll be that Cadillac beef or pork or lamb or poultry or seafood out there. But I think you'll begin to see that package of something that is true to itself, and it should be displayed next to it. Proportionally, I think we're way far away from even having that discussion, but you have to begin at the beginning, and I'd like to see that beginning. I'd like to be part of that beginning. It'd be amazing to have any of these products come through, and something that we've all touched, and not just to say, hey, I'm the first, but to say, we're making a change, and we're doing it here in the United States. But unfortunately, this is first world, and this is a first world product. It would be impossible to do this for the masses, in my opinion, for a very long time. I don't know about the Moore's Law portion of this and how far out we are before actually having a marketable product. I have absolutely zero concept of that, but from my discussion with many people, we're only producing things in very small quantities, shelf life, all these other things. There's so many questions that need to be answered, and especially with such a intriguing product, with packaging, as for example, there's modified atmospheric packaging where you're adding argon or nitrogen to offset the oxidizing of the product. So it's going to be red to keep it from turning brown. For example, you need to do that with this product. It would need to be vacuum sealed in a specific, beautiful package to keep that. It would last for, I don't know what the shelf life is, but in the proper conditions of proper packaging, I would imagine something like this could last probably 60 to 90 days. I don't know that, but I know the cells of regular beef and how that work. The Japanese beef that comes from Japan is fresh. The way it's packaged at the K1 plant in Kagoshima, I can get 120 days shelf life if I do not open the package. Their packaging technology has been perfected to literally a science. They're amazing. So just like everything the Japanese do, the U.S. could learn a lot. But once again, those are the people you'd want to talk to first, because they've done it. They know what to do. They know what they're doing because they have a premium product. So anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Thanks for that. So something that all of you have been talking about a bit is the timeline question. And I think everybody in this room is pretty familiar with lots of different figures getting thrown out. 20 years, 50 years, 5 years, 1 year. I'd love to hear from each of you your insight and your take on why we've kind of been getting the timelines for when cultivated meat is actually going to show up on our plates wrong for so long. Maybe Tim, you can start us off.
Sure, that's it's a tricky question. Biology's hard. Probably most of you know that. Kind of most of the research that we've seen in terms of when we look at muscle fibers is getting it down to like 20 or 30 microns now. The way that muscle fibers are in our body and in animals' bodies is more like 200 or 300 microns. So we're like, from what I've seen, for the most part, we're at like 1/10 of where we need to be. So biology can be very, very tricky. There's also the interrelated nature of biology, which I talked about before. The things that seem to support a beneficial part of the process can operate to the detriment of other parts of the process as well, which means that running experiments often means that we need to do that experiment end to end to understand how that factor actually touches each of those different steps. In terms of getting predictions wrong, Churchill said 50 years. He wasn't too far off. For someone that was envisioning that before. We first discovered the muscle stem cell in like 1961, right? And that imagery is amazing for anyone that wants to check it out. So it's not been that far from when we discovered something so fundamental to this to when we're having conversations around when that's going to be on your shelves. So I think actually we've done phenomenally well. We've taken the cost from 300,000 euros for that first burger down to something that is a nominal indication of that. So I honestly, and I'm very bullish and obviously remarkably biased, but I would love to see us having products on the shelves within a couple of years and having a mass market product within 6 to 7 years. Now again, we'll be on a panel in 4 years from now going, why was Tim so wrong? And that's fine too, but I think that when you pull together groups around a mission, which is what we're doing, and it is a serious mission, and it's a really very important mission, things start to happen at a pace that we didn't think was possible. The human genome took $1 billion to sequence, and now I'm talking about sequencing the genome of a pig in my spare time, right? Things change faster than we could have imagined before, and I think that that's exactly what's going to happen here because all of the reasons are available and present for it. Insulin was prohibitively expensive, and we had a barbaric way of doing it, and now it's gotten to the point where it's gotten so cheap that there's documentaries about the fact that it's rising a little bit above that. So it's become the new normal for that to be so cheap. So look, we've gotten it wrong because we had ambitions. We bit off more than we could chew, and that's the right way to do it. We wouldn't have so many people here in the room if we hadn't created the imagination about this not being on the shelves next year. Now, I don't think that should let us stop making hardcore predictions. I really think that we can do this faster than we thought was possible.
Great. First of all, that was a great pun. Bit off more than you could chew. Also, on the $300,000 or 300,000 euro burger, are you talking about Mark Post's?
I am, yes.
Okay. Yeah, that was. What year did that happen?
2013, so
Okay,
that's
wow.
less than 6 years.
Yeah, 6 years ago. Okay, great. How about Cody? Do you want to take it next?
Because venture capital doesn't like to hear anything greater than 5 years. So I'm the only one who's not
That's fair.
funded, probably in the room. Guy as well. So I get to say that. Of course, joking aside, I honestly think that some of it was some of the uncertainty around the regulatory aspect, at least in the U.S. I totally get being a little bit careful and diligent in terms of setting a course forward without the entirety of the regulatory pathway in place as to what is this called and how can we market this? What are all of the things that need to be put in place? I think it's fantastic in terms of the Alliance and what the Alliance is doing to be able to create that regulatory pathway for the rest of the group. So I feel like that portion of it certainly lag things behind, but also, as an outsider looking in, I think it's been really fast. Like, since the first time that I went to New Harvest 2 years ago, things have been moving. Like, I feel like it is an exponential increase in the developments, for sure. It's just a lot.
Yeah, and with that said, on my end, in terms of timing, I'm just hinging on what's you guys are going to produce. I'll say it this way, I've got the Gucci of butcher shops in the whole Western Hemisphere, one. So my challenge is to you guys, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is the $300,000 hamburger. I don't need the publicity or the press, but I would love our shop to be the forum for you guys to come and put your product out on display next to high-end, traditional, premium protein products, and actually have that discussion in our shop and see how that one of the #1 foodie places outside of Tokyo in the world receives that product, because this is not going to Safeway anytime soon. And this is going to be a boutique product for quite some time. I don't see this hitting the normal restaurant or the normal grocery store anytime soon. And I don't know how to ask that question too, is that what is that end goal, you know, and when do you guys see that as a marketable product? And when do all those startup dollars actually begin to pay off? And like I said earlier, you gotta begin at the beginning, you know, and somebody's got to sell it first. So why don't you guys let me sell it first? I'll give it a good run, you know. I'm pretty good at it. You know, I can sell ice water to an Eskimo, so I imagine we could do it. So it'd be fun. It'd be a good time.
So I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions from all of you. Can I see raised hands with questions? Anybody? Yes, someone in the back. Can we pass them a mic?
Well, thank you so much. I guess one of the questions that I had was around the potential unintended consequences, right? And so, you know, we went through the path of talking about how conventional agriculture has gotten to this point. And one could assume if, you know, this new technology is successful, there's potentially unintended consequences with that when it gets to scale. Not only for conventional agriculture and the 180 million corn and soybean acres that would potentially be wasted or have to be converted to something else, because the majority of the corn and soybean that's grown is grown for feed. And so question about that. And then just with any industry that gets to scale, there's a lot of waste and other things that potentially occur. And so just curious if you guys have done any thinking about the unintended consequences, because it's a discussion that likely should happen if it isn't already.
Thank you.
Well, I certainly have thought about it to some extent. You know, coming from a conventional agriculture background, you're exactly right. You know, one of the things that I've entered into conversations with my farmers and ranchers is to have them aware of potential disruption, and for them to be able to recognize what they would have to do on their own farms. And of course, nobody has the answer to that, but I've had that same question. What do we do with the grasslands? That is a great carbon sequester. What do we do with that corn and soybean? Is it just going to be maybe it's going to be sawgrass? Maybe it's going to be you know, sugar beets, because we need the sugar as a substrate to grow the cultured meat. Like there's certainly that's connected. Ground beef is a byproduct of the stuff that you sell, right? It is a huge part of our food chain, but it is not a premium product. But it is part of, a cow makes that, and a cow makes a liver, and a cow makes a lot of things that we typically would not eat in this culture, or that we would put back into animal food, like dogs and cats. There is a lot of that's going to need to be addressed. I think with the growing global population, that some of that will just, you know, there will be a price depreciation in some of those products, and some of those products will move from first world to third world. But you're exactly right. There should be more thought in kind of planning that out. But I'm also a huge proponent of the free market and capitalism, and I think it'll work itself out to some extent as well. Like the process will follow the money to some extent.
Yeah, I got some thoughts on that as well. Really, really awesome question in terms of the unintended consequences. I wanted to address that in a few different areas. One is to do with like the fields and obviously all of the different crops that contribute towards animal farming. And you talked about carbon sequestering in grass. I think that there's better ways to do that. I think that when we talked about partnerships, we need to be thinking about the partnerships with the existing incumbent industries as well. There are crops that you said that are going to be inputs to what we're doing. Sugar sorghum is an incredibly water efficient crop that is quite arduous and can work on these crops really, really well, and that's going to be an input there. So there are other revenue streams that exist there, and then there are other technologies that are popping up too. So there's a company called Soil Sequest who are creating a microbe that allows you to sequester carbon in a much more efficient manner as well. And there are money opportunities there as well. So their business model is helping companies sell that crop carbon, or by sequestering that carbon, they get carbon credits. And so they're actually getting more money for doing that as well. Where I wanted to kind of flip that, though, is the intended consequences that exist in there, too. Because right now, when it comes to the incumbents and the way that we're doing things now, there are intended consequences. And those intended consequences are what you talked about in terms of the environment and what we're doing right now. There's also intended consequences for cultured meat as well. When it comes to human health, we're removing, because of the way that we're producing, we're removing a lot of the carcinogens and pathogens that exist in the way that we produce meat at the moment. So that is an intended consequence. There is unintended consequences potentially there as well, which we need to keep an eye on with anything that we do in biology. That's a fantastic, fantastic question, something we need to think about. But I think it's more important to understand, if we don't dive into the science of this, if we don't understand it, then what are the intended consequences that exist in the incumbent meat at the moment?
Okay, great. We still have a couple minutes, so I'm going to say let's take 2 more questions max. Yes, in the red. There's a mic coming.
It's for Tim. What would be your approach to solve this problem? So ideally to accelerate having this cost like guy was talking. If you had $1 trillion, what would be your approach to solve the problem?
So what was the problem, sorry?
Yeah, the problem to reduce this cost, so to go from making the analogy to genome, so from 1 billion to $10.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that is the $1 trillion question. We've got a couple of ways that we're looking at that. I think that it's incredibly important to understand those maturation steps. So understanding, because a lot of the yield, when it comes down to it, it's how do we translate inputs, and that might be time or media or whatever it is, or money, into actual yield on the other end. And I think a lot of that comes down to the maturation steps. So how do we move from not just being able to differentiate those cells, but being able to take those differentiated cells and create effective fusion so that we're getting the thickness of the muscle fibers that we need in order to be able to start playing around with texture to make for more efficient yield as well. There's a lot of costs involved, and there's a lot of different things that we're doing, but for now our focus is on that step and a few others as well, without kind of giving it all away.
All right, I'm being told my time is up. So thank you so much for having me, for spending part of your Friday evening with me, and let's say thanks to all of our wonderful panelists up here.
Thank you.